Potential home buyers. This is Vanetta again, the teacher agent, and this is a continuation of the or a deeper dive, I should say, into the video that I did earlier about how much it's really going to cost you to buy a home. So let's talk about the overall transaction costs. So transaction costs to me consist of several things. So first of all, earnest money deposit, we often refer to it as EMD. And 2 days or 3 days rather after your ratification, meaning that you and the client have agreed on the offer contract, then EMD or earnest money deposit is expected. And so depending on what's going on in the market, you will want to put down 1, 2, or 3% of the sales price because it makes your offer look better. And so we will talk about what's going on in the market and then the recommendation at the time. Then number 2 would be down payment. So down payment really goes to the bank. So it doesn't go to the seller, and neither does the EMD. The EMD stays with the title company. And so depending on the type of loan that you get, most people when they buy a house, they usually think they have to put down 20%. That's for a conventional loan. Well, that's no longer the case. You can get a conventional loan for as low as 3% or as high as 20% or more. The more you put down, the less you have to pay per month. However, that doesn't always make sense. That would be a good thing to talk about with your lender. Now, for an FHA loan, there's a minimum requirement of down payment, which is 3.5% of the sales price of the home. For VA, for vets, there's no required down payment. However, they still do have to pay buyer's compensation, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Number 3, closing costs. Closing costs, everybody wants to know where the closing costs. So closing costs are usually 2.5% to 3% of the sales price, and we'll go into a little more detail on the next slide. Number 4, home inspections. So when you buy a home, you want to have a home inspection, whether it's depending on what kind of home it is, townhouse or detached, and depending on the size of the home would indicate how much would determine how much the cost is for the inspection. Usually between $4 and $550, again, depending on the size of the home. Now, you want to also have a radon inspection if there's a basement, because radon is prevalent in Virginia, and it is a colorless, odorless gas, which over time could be a carcinogen element. So I'm talking all these transaction costs here. I'm really talking about Virginia. Maryland is close by, and I'm licensed there. And so they're a little bit higher in Maryland. But this is overall the same thing in terms of cost. Again, radon inspection is separate. The fee and is separate from the home inspection. And then you have wood destroying insects, DWI, or termites, fancy word for termites. That's a very inexpensive cost. The bank is going to require it because they want to make sure that you're not being eaten out. The house is not being eaten out from under you before you even buy it. So that cost is minimal, $40, $75, not very expensive. But again, it would determine the size of the home. Appraisal. The bank is also going to require that you have an appraisal, because even though they're willing to lend you 80, 90, 95% of the loan for the home, they don't want to lend you more than the home is valued or more than the home is worth. So they're going to require that you have appraisal, and that's a cost that you'll have to pay for. And so again, depending on the size of the home, would determine how much the cost of the appraisal would be. Now, I tell people overall they want to have about 7% in savings. Savings could be from their 401k, from in-laws, from gifts, from family and relatives. That 7% could also be part of first-time homebuyer grants, which are prevalent in Virginia and also in certain counties. So you want to ask the lender about that. So number 7, suggested dates and deadlines. When you sign a contract offer, there are certain deadlines, dates that have to be adhered to. So home inspections are usually between 3 and 5 days. Now I really need to kind of update my slide, because really the expectation, the seller doesn't want to have their home off the market any longer than they have to. Say for example, you have a home inspection and there's a negotiation period on repairs if that was part of the original offer. And if there's not a meeting of the minds, and so you decide to walk away, the homeowner will have only lost a few days and hopefully not any other potential buyers. So they don't want to have that home off the market for any length of time. Home inspection and radon inspections are usually done during the same period of time. Now, also, there's a deadline on HOA and condo association rules and regulations. We call them resale certificates. You get a whole package of documents that you have 72 hours to read over to make sure there's nothing in those documents that you cannot live with. You know, you might want to paint your house Easter egg yellow, and that's not allowed. So if that's what you want, and this condo doesn't, or association doesn't allow that, this may not be the place for you. So again, you have 72 hours to read those documents. Then you have other deadlines. Financing contingency, there's a deadline. They want to make sure that you have the money to buy the home, again, within a certain period of time. Appraisal deadline. The appraisal company is required to submit their appraisal to you, the buyer, again, with a certain deadline, because there might be more negotiations, and you want to negotiate that before you get to close. You don't want to get to the last minute and then there's no closing because the negotiation wasn't met. So that's why there are deadlines on that. Then the standard buying process is usually 30 days. 45 days is kind of, that's not the norm. That's an exception, not the norm. So usually closing date takes place in 30 days. No closing dates on weekends at all. Then there's an escalation clause when an offer is submitted. Depending on how much competition there is, I would advise you on escalation clause. I don't want to go into the detail of that because really it would be kind of it'd be unnecessary to talk about it this time. But when an offer is put in, we will talk about escalation clause if I think it is a good idea. And then number 10, I used to tell my buyers, don't ask for seller subsidy if you don't need it. However, because it puts your offer in a lower position. However, we're not referring to it as seller subsidy right now anymore. What we're now asking, or I shouldn't say anymore, because seller subsidy can also still be a request. However, in addition to that, there's also now buyer agent compensation that the buyers will want to ask the sellers for. And there's no stigma against that. That's now the norm. All right, so we've talked about transaction costs. Now let's talk about closing costs. So closing costs, what are closing costs? So closing costs consist of several different items. And so 3 days before you close, you'll get a list of these items with numbers beside them. So you know exactly what your cost, what you're paying for. If you haven't paid for the property appraisal ahead of time, that would be part of the closing cost. And the same with the home inspection. However, usually these things are required to be paid for. One, the property appraisal is usually required to be paid for ahead of time by the bank. And the home inspection is usually paid for the day of inspection by the home inspector. So these are not usually typically in the home inspection, in the closing costs, but they could be. Then there's a processing fee, there's underwriting fee, lender fee, loan discount fee. If you have requested to have your what do you call it? I can't think of the name of it right now. Your interest amount reduced, there's a loan discount fee. A recording fee, a settlement officer fee, title insurance. There's two types of title insurances that you would be advised to purchase, but not on this slide. Not on this slide. There's a document fee preparation. Now, though I do prepare a lot of documents, but this fee is not for me. My document preparation fee is part of the compensation, part of my compensation. Escrow taxes and insurance, prepaid interest. Some things have to be paid up front, like HOA fees and condominium fees have to be paid before you make your first mortgage payment. So we refer to these as prepaid interest payments. Credit reports. A credit report is going to be run when you first apply for a loan and when you get ready to close. So there's going to be two reports, so there's going to be a fee for that. Transfer fee, taxes to transfer the property from one from one owner to another, and then there will be a notary fee. So these are what consists of closing costs. So the next time you hear that, know that, again, when you buy a home, you not only need money for down payment, but you also need money for closing costs. And now, in addition to that, buyer compensation discussion. All right? So I'm going to send this to you, and please let me know if you have